In the movie Zeitgeist, we are presented with the claim that the majority of ancient gods, such as Christ, Krishna, Attis, and Mithra, are entirely based on astrological correspondences, and further, that they are all inherently sun gods. This short-sighted idea misrepresents ancient mythology and religion by reducing it to a materialistic circus of celestial jokers. In fact, only a small selection of the world's myths are related to the deification of the sun. The ancient philosophers were far less concerned with the sun and more concerned with the human soul and its self-perfection, in a similar fashion as today's religious worshippers. It is true that a large portion of mythology and religious scriptures fall into the origins category. These are narratives which recount the story of creation, either of the first humans or of primal earth, and the personification of natural forces into gods. However, the most important category of mythology, and also the most overlooked or ignored, is also the most obvious: an interpretation of a personal spiritual awakening and expansion of consciousness. This is the real secret of the ancient myths, a truth which scholars with an atheistic bent of mind cannot acknowledge, as it defines the world's religions and mythology in terms of a common spiritual experience. Humanity has a deep-seated desire to experience oneness with all that exists, an urge to know thyself and return to wholeness. The great scriptures are founded on this impulse, which is biologically imprinted into the human genome. Were it not, the influence of religion and spirituality would not have such a strong impact on human life as it does today. We see this impulse even from ancient times. The ancient Egyptians, for example, believed in the immortality of the soul. Their intricate funeral burials and mummification process was created in direct response to the challenges presented by the transition of the human soul into the afterlife. In the 5th century BC, Herodotus, the Greek historian, wrote,
"The Egyptians say that Isis and Osiris are the rulers of the lower world. The Egyptians were the first who maintained the following doctrine too, that the human soul is immortal, and at the death of the body enters into some other living thing, then coming to birth, and after passing through all creatures of land, sea, and air, it enters once more into a human body at birth, a cycle which it completes in 3,000 years.
The Egyptians believed that after a person died, their soul was judged in the underworld by Osiris, after Anubis weighted it against a feather to review its karmic fate. One was later reincarnated through a preordained cycle of bodies until the mind became completely conscious. Isis, Osiris, Horus, and Sait were not just vegetation or solar gods. They were also symbolic representations of the different archetypes within the human soul. Isis represented the power of transformation and a virgin birth, which is a symbol for sublimation of sexual energy. Sait, a personification of the destructive power of the serpent, depicted as a golden snake which destroyed the sun each night. Osiris was the god of the underworld and judge of the dead. Horus represented the divine child within each person that is reborn to a higher stage of consciousness. The life and death cycles of nature became a metaphor applied to the human soul, reflecting its reincarnation cycle through the signs of the zodiac and the soul's judgment in the underworld, its return to earth and final realization, which was of far greater importance than worship of the sun. Religious myths are a form of poetic allegory built with symbols and motifs reflective of a spiritual awakening. These symbols are communicated from inner planes of consciousness, which seek to guide humanity on the right path in order to transform the physical body into a perfect instrument of the soul's expression. As if from a cosmic seed, humanity is unfolding on this planet, destined to bloom into a cosmic conscious species. The sun and solar disk are more than just symbols of our planetary star. They are both iconic images, analogous to mystical illumination, expressing the radiance of one who has entered into the state of samadhi, or cosmic consciousness. The image of the sun and serpent are inseparable in Egyptian iconography. In the case of the god Ra, the golden sun disk sits atop his head. Likewise, Isis is depicted with a white moon disk on her head. These head ornaments correspond to the male and female archetypal energies and the colors experienced in meditation. This spiritual interpretation of the solar disk as the mechanism responsible for inner illumination is more in line with the core teaching of ancient Egypt. If the solar disk was simply a sun, why would it be encircled by a serpent? The pharaohs wore a crown that contained a snake, usually identified as a cobra. This was called a uraeus, a symbol for the goddess Wadjet. Wearing this crown was a sign of divine authority and protection. Wadjet was the guardian and patron god of the Nile deltas and protector of all Lower Egypt. Symbolically speaking, the uraeus clearly shows an upright serpent projecting out of the forehead of the pharaoh, which would translate into a symbolic representation that the pharaoh had awakened the serpent power and opened his third eye. The third eye was traditionally known as the doorway into the psychic realm, enabling one to gain access to the powers of intuition and foresight. It signifies the powers acquired over many lives and that of the pharaoh's authority of royal descent. In this light, the classical archaeologist's presumption the Egyptians were simply ignorant snake worshippers is entirely reversed. Indeed, it was the early scholars who were uninformed of the spiritual heights that Egypt had reached. The symbol of the serpent is the most common image found in all mythology. For thousands of years, Western scholars have misinterpreted it as a literal snake or condemned it as Satan. Interpreting the serpent as an image which denotes the ascension of prana or sublimated sexual energy up the spine in a curved path allows the core doctrines of religious narratives, scriptures, and mythology to be compared and analyzed in a logical manner. Since it is a biological process, these changes can be physically verified through a research program, finally bridging the obtuse chasm between religion and science. Related symbols, such as the virgin birth, staffs with pine cones, the caduceus and world tree, golden treasures, the sacred bull, and the sun are universal elements found in world religions due to the fact they are a visual form of communication originating from the sequence of events that follow the awakening of Kundalini. Mythology and religions were created to guide humanity in the discovery of hidden mental and spiritual laws that govern the evolution of the brain and our psychological health. These laws, when followed, lead to a better understanding of one's timeless self. Our present human condition, which is based on a rebellion against the natural order of life, can only lead to more suffering. Today, The greatest tragedy is not the crimes committed by the religious establishment or the international banking system, but by the tragic ignorance of our spiritual destiny. The real solution and the road to happiness have always laid in knowledge of oneself.